Sony just did some major retconning to their Spider-Man universe, and while a lot of people do understand that Sony doesn't necessarily care about continuity, I mean, come on, what was with that Morbius post-credit scene? We're still wondering why Sony put Venom into the MCU in the Venom Let There Be Carnage post-credit scene, took him out of the MCU and put him back into the original Venom universe in the Spider-Man No Way Home post-credit scene, but left a piece of the symbiote behind in the MCU so Tom Holland's Spider-Man could eventually bond with Venom, only to seemingly undo all of that in Venom 3: The Last Dance with what we saw in the new trailer released yesterday. That combined with seeing Rhys Ifans return in the trailer, who played Lizard in the Amazing Spider-Man movies, left a lot of fans wondering what the heck is actually going on. But I think I might know what Sony is actually planning here, and I think it has to do with Sony's plans for a new/old Spider-Man universe with Andrew Garfield returning as Spider-Man himself. In fact, the 10-year-old Peter Parker that is supposed to be in Venom 3, I think might actually be Andrew Garfield Spider-Man. And yes, there are some continuity issues with that, but again, Sony doesn't necessarily care about that. Plus, not to mention, you could add a multiverse aspect to it, but we'll get to that later on in the video. What's interesting is that Sony already had plans for Andrew Garfield Spider-Man to return. Now, rumors about Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire returning as Spider-Man once again after Spider-Man No Way Home really haven't stopped since the movie came out. And as we move closer towards Avengers Secret Wars in the MCU, we hear even more rumors that both of them, Tobey and Andrew, are going to return. And the biggest rumor after Spider-Man No Way Home was that Sony was actually really pleased with the crowd's reaction, the fans' reactions to Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man. And let's be honest, it was an awesome redemption arc for him. Many people loved what happened in that movie with Andrew Garfield. Well, the rumors that Sony wanted Andrew Garfield to return were confirmed with Madam Web. If you didn't know, Andrew Garfield was supposed to be in Madam Web. The plot was pretty much kind of like Venom 3, actually. In fact, it kind of seems like they basically took the Peter Parker plot out of Madam Web to use in Venom 3, and perhaps that's why the movie kind of doesn't really make a lot of sense. And Dakota Johnson did state that the script that she was given was not really anything like what we saw on screen. And since we know Spider-Man was supposed to be in the film, we even have official concept art of Spider-Man in Madam Web fighting Ezekiel Sims, the main villain. We know that what was changed about the movie was indeed Peter Parker / Spider-Man. Now, Sony originally intended for Andrew Garfield Spider-Man to be in the film. However, they eventually decided to use Tom Holland's Spider-Man instead. But then, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you view this, they realized that the timeline was wrong, so they reshot and they removed everything referencing Spider-Man and a particular year, giving us a film whose original plans included and kind of revolved around Spider-Man that didn't end up having anything to do with Spider-Man at all. Barely. But clearly what this establishes is that Sony did have plans for Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man. Now, for some reason, they decided to remove Andrew Garfield's specific Spider-Man from the film. They still wanted a Spider-Man in the film, so they were going to go with Tom Holland's Spider-Man. So if Spider-Man was still going to be in the film, why take Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man away? In fact, I think many people would have rather seen Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man in that film than Tom Holland's Spider-Man, but we got nothing, so it doesn't matter. But the question remains, why take Andrew Garfield away? I believe that it could be because they had plans for him in Venom 3. Now, if you haven't heard, what is supposed to happen in Venom 3 is we are supposed to be introduced to a 10-year-old Peter Parker. And ultimately, Venom and Eddie Brock are supposedly going to protect him throughout the film. This is kind of what the Madam Web plot was supposed to be about, originally at least, before they butchered everything. But I think they took that specific plot point away so they could use it later on. Enter Venom 3, where this is now supposed to happen. Eddie and Venom will protect a young 10-year-old Peter Parker, but still the question is, why? Why do this now in the last Venom film? What's the point of introducing a Peter Parker to this universe? Well, if we know Sony, and we do, they won't give up any rights to Spider-Man. I know a good majority of us wish that the rights to Spider-Man and all of the Spider-Man characters that Sony owns could just go back to Marvel Studios, but let's be honest, Sony is never going to let that happen. So what are they going to do? Well, in order to fulfill their contract to actually keep the rights to these characters, they have to produce a certain amount of movies within a certain certain amount of time between each other. So they're just going to keep on making Spider-Man movies. But of course they're a studio and they want to make money, and let's assume they want the movies to actually be good. What would their move be right now? After basically everything but Venom and Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, which doesn't really count, it's its own thing. So basically Venom is their only success and everything else has bombed. Their move is probably to start over. Get a new Spider-Man, get some new characters in there, get a whole entire new story. Start from the beginning, build up these characters, build some continuity in your universe that you're trying to establish, and basically give yourself a second chance to see if you can get it right. I believe that this might be what they're doing, and that's why they might possibly be introducing this 10-year-old Peter Parker. Because Venom was supposed to originally come out after Kraven the Hunter, which we're not sure if it actually connects to any type of Spider-Man story at all. Yes, we do see some spiders in the trailer, but again, I mean, who knows? The point is, Venom was supposed to be kind of the last film here. It is called The Last Dance, and that's mostly due to the fact that this is Tom Hardy's last solo Venom film, but perhaps it's the last dance for kind of the universe that they set up. And now they're gonna start over, and they could possibly use Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man to start over. And this could actually tie in Rhys Ifans' Dr. Connors. Dr. Connors did know the Parkers, so there is a chance that perhaps he knew Peter Parker when he was a young boy. Perhaps we see that in Venom: The Last Stand. Perhaps they're doing kind of a little bit of retconning here to simply set up Andrew Garfield as an adult Spider-Man later on. Now, of course, there are some continuity issues with this, like time. The year that the Amazing Spider-Man movies took place in, where Peter Parker was almost an adult, basically an adult, depending on what age you view an adult as. But he wasn't 10, and now we're in 2023, and he will be 10. That's obviously an issue. However, again, like I said, I don't think Sony really cares about that, especially if you kind of are starting over. Then really, why would you care? Especially when everything just has been pretty lackluster, except for the Venom films. And seemingly, they don't care because of what they've now retconned for the Spider-Man No Way Home post-credit scene. They are saying that that didn't happen in the MCU, but it happened in the Venomverse. At least that's what it seems. We don't know the full story yet because the movie hasn't come out, but based off of what we've seen from the trailer, that appears to be what they are doing. The piece of the Venom symbiote was supposed to be left in the MCU. They are stating now that Venom really never went to the MCU. He stayed in his own universe, but perhaps just simply traveled through space somehow, which also doesn't make sense because in the Venom Let There Be Carnage post-credit scene, we saw Tom Holland's Spider-Man, so very clearly he was in the MCU. But the trailer seemingly undoes that, so they don't necessarily really care about continuity and they're willing to retcon things, but that's not the only option. Yes, you could have Andrew Garfield Spider-Man be the 10-year-old Peter Parker that we see in Venom 3, and then just continue to do Spider-Man movies after Venom 3 and ignore the continuity, or you could go the multiverse route and simply say that this is a variant, and it's just a little bit off time-wise than the other timeline which had the Amazing Spider-Man, Andrew Garfield's. That's kind of the easiest option that would make the most sense. Sony was clearly involved in the multiverse in some way, shape, or form at first with those post-credit scenes for Venom Let There Be Carnage and Spider-Man No Way Home, so clearly the multiverse isn't an off-limits subject to them. And of course, Into the Spider-Verse, they did that really well. Now you can just say that it's Phil Lord and Christopher Miller, but Sony did make the movie. So it is something they could incorporate in their live-action films. Now, the reason I believe this is Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man is because they originally wanted him in Madam Web. I think they cut him because they wanted him to be used in another project, possibly Venom 3, because we heard Tom Hardy say that he wants Spider-Man vs. Venom. That's what he wanted. I believe we still could get that, but I believe that might have been on the table for Venom 3, then they took it off, and that's why they're now going with the young 10-year-old Peter Parker story, because they want Andrew Garfield to maybe helm his own films once again. Unfortunately, Tobey's a little too old now. He could return as the older Peter Parker like we saw him in Spider-Man No Way Home, but Andrew Garfield still looks pretty young and he could play a Peter Parker in his 20s. Plus, not to mention the reception of him in Spider-Man No Way Home, again, was amazing. People loved his return. They loved his redemption, and a lot of people really want to see him return again. And it seems like Sony has basically realized that and realized that without Spider-Man, their universe or whatever they were trying to establish doesn't really work. So their plan could be start over and actually use a Spider-Man in their Spider-Man universe. Use a Spider-Man that people love. Andrew Garfield's, at least they love him now. He did get a lot of flack for those two Amazing Spider-Man movies, but everybody seems to love him for the most part now. Plus, if we are going to see Tobey Maguire return and Andrew Garfield return in Avengers Secret Wars, it's pretty easy to tie all that together and create a lot of hype for his return that way. Sony clearly had or has some type of plan for Spider-Man to be in their movies. It was going to be Andrew Garfield's, then Tom Holland's, but of course that got changed, but it's in their plans. And honestly, if I were them and I wanted to keep the rights to Spider-Man, this is what I would do. I would start over and create a universe that is actually focused on Spider-Man, not the Spider-Man adjacent characters. I think they really overestimated how much people would care about these Spider-Man characters without Spider-Man actually being in the movie. But this is my theory of what Sony could be possibly doing and how Andrew Garfield could return to be a main Spider-Man of a Sony Spider-Man universe. So go ahead, let me know your thoughts about this in the comments down below. Do you think Sony will do this? And if they do you think it'll work or do you think it'll fail? Leave your thoughts down below. Please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel to stay up to date on the MCU and the Sony Spider-Man verse. Links to our other social media platforms and the giveaway information are in the description and the pinned comment down below. And as always, thank you all so much for watching. Woof woof.